generally people don't like fat, but I have mentioned this before that fat is really important for your body. It's important for storing energy, keeping your organs safe, regulating body temperature, helping you absorb fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. And it is very important part of hormone production. I've actually mentioned this before because I specialize working with more menopausal women. Is actually menopausal women tend to need good fats. They need to have more healthy fats than someone else because of the hormone levels. And so, yeah, fats is really, really important, right? Now, obviously, there is different types of fats. In terms of going to the different types of fat, the one thing I will say, I did say it at the beginning, is again, the research around like brown fat and all of that is still being developed. It's just more recent few years that they have actually really started to discover like, okay, there's actually different types of fat cells in your body: brown fat, white fat, beige fat, all of this type of stuff, which structurally looks different under the microscope. But how it fully is utilized and its impact on people, obviously, as you know, research is always being done, right? So like they start with animals and rodents, and they transfer it to like a cohort of people and like 50 people, then they do this and that. So it's just, there's going to need more research on this. I just want to say that as a preface, okay? And so just being open-minded. I always say that a lot of times when I teach, I really don't want people to take things and be like, that's it, that's the only thing. And all my own clients know this. Like, I believe that even certain concepts, some will apply more to someone than another because your bodies are different. Everyone's different. Your genetic coding is different. And then your epigenetics of how things get expressed out is also different based on your environment, right? So we have to make sure we don't like just blanket statement things and all of that. So with that preface, we're going to get into all the different types of fat. Okay, so first of all, white fat. All right, so the white fat, I made a joke with Rosalinda because she posted a little piggy, a GIF yesterday. And I was like, I think that piggy has more white fat. And then she made a joke back and said, that's why we're all here. We want to learn to not have so much white fat. So white fat is the typical kind that you're thinking of. It is a type of fat that is found in your connective tissues, subcutaneous fat just under your skin, in the abdominal cavity, which is what I speak a lot about, which is visceral fat, right? And so menopausal women tend to struggle with a little bit more white fat, particularly the visceral belly fat. And this type of fat is kind of like, it's like grease. It's like a greasy type of fat that, you've eaten fat from an animal, right? Like greasy type of fat that is like loosely held together by connective tissue. So because it's kind of like a more of a greasy type of fat, it kind of, if you have too much of it, it tends to hang, right? So this is why a lot of people don't like it, because if you have more fat, it'll tend to hang and kind of doesn't have that great shape to it, right? And they do, like, white fat can vary from, oh, you're listening as you're driving. Awesome, Oshone. And so white fats can vary in size. Typically, the cells are very circular, but they can range from white to yellow. And typically, we find a lot of the visceral fat is yellowy. Does anyone know why the fat is yellowy? Somebody put below if you know why your visceral fat or some fats can turn yellow. With white fat cells, okay, what happens is when you eat food, okay, it converts excess glucose that you don't need into lipid droplets, okay? And this is basically like a storage mechanism for white fat cells, right? That's what white fat cells are all about. It's about storage. So when you eat too much or too much of something, do you remember I once said, if you eat too much protein, you could gain fat. You eat too much carbs, you can gain fat. If you eat too much fat, you can gain fat, right? It's just when you have excess, this is when your body goes, well, we don't really need it. So we're going to put it right into a fat cell or into a lipid. And that lipid will then store it. And then under situations where it needs to be used, like it's requiring more energy, then it will release that lipid into like fatty acids, and then the fatty acids can then go into the bloodstream, right? So basically, if you have a lot of white fat or white fat cells, then you just have a lot of storage, right? Now, like I said, a little bit is okay. And there's, everyone needs a little bit of fat. Okay. It's part of being healthy. However, when you have too much white fat, that's when it becomes pretty dangerous. Because when it's too much white fat cells, it actually slows down a number of different things, but it slows down something called adiponectin. And adiponectin actually, it helps regulate your glucose level, your lipid metabolism, and insulin sensitivity. And adiponectin is anti-inflammatory. So it actually helps you decrease inflammation in your system. But when you have too much fat, like white fat cells and all of that, it interrupts that cycle. And this is where a lot of times, like people with a lot of like white fat cells tend to have problems with glucose and insulin. And often it's related to what? You guys know this. When you have a lot of insulin, like improper balance, and the body's not regulating it well, it becomes potentially type 2 diabetes, right? That's kind of why people want to get rid of white fat cells. Yeah, diabetes, exactly, Margaret, exactly, Gigi. So because if it's too much of it, then it does interrupt a lot of your hormonal signalings, and it leads to metabolic disorders, right? So we all know that. And I think that's why everybody kind of tends to want to have less fat in their body. Although, like, again, a little bit is important for like, a little bit of storage. And like, as women, you need a little bit more, right? But yeah, too much of it is when you don't want that, like overly too much is going to impact your insulin, your glucose level, your metabolism level, right? So I want to come back to the yellow fat. Nobody guessed the yellow fat. So the yellow fat is the yellow color that you see a lot of times in the visceral belly section. That is still white fat. Okay, so let's be clear. So under the microscope, it is still white fat cells, which is like basically like you have a nucleus and then a big lipid drop in the white fat cell. And so it still is a white fat cell, but it just turns yellow because like unmetabolized carotenoids and grains that have that color, they don't get metabolized and they drift over and then kind of tint the fat yellow. Okay. It's not necessarily bad, sort of like when I don't know if you've ever eaten like too much carrots or something and you're like, oh, how come like what comes out is kind of orangey? Like it's kind of like that, right? Where it's like the color. But it can also indicate, like, one of the things I say a lot about visceral fat is inflammation, right? And I have a big thing about the types of food you eat and the grains or the wheats and things like that can cause probably some of this because it's not being metabolized well. But it's not necessarily like, white fat cells can look white and slightly yellow. Okay. So just know that. Again, like I said, a little bit is okay. If we really talk percentages as a woman, like anywhere between 20 to 25% is okay. If you're starting to reach above that, like 26, 27, 28, it's okay too. You're just probably a little curvier. If you're starting to creep above 28% to above 30%, then we know that now we're getting into some serious potential health issues, right?